Like most readers, I know that there are authors out there that I have not read that I would love. Those authors that have the perfect combination of writing style and the kinds of stories that they tell that I just connect with as a reader. And I just hope in my lifetime that I discover as many of those as I can. Well, I think I just discovered one in the form of Robin Hobb. So let's talk about it. But before I get started into a spoiler-free review of Robin Hobb's Farseer Trilogy, please give me a like and subscribe if you have not already. And if you get to the end of the video and you like what you saw, drop me a comment as well. Or if you just want to talk about Robin Hobb or the Farseer Trilogy, all of those things will help YouTube know to send this video to others. But let's get started. First of all, a little bit of a background of me as a reader and why it's taken me so long to discover Robin Hobb. I read a lot of fantasy growing up, middle school, high school, but when I got into my 20s, I branched out into some more genres that I still enjoy today. Most notably, I've read a lot of classics and read a lot of historical fiction. But last year, in the midst of, well, 2020, we all know what that year was about, I came back to the fantasy genre and read the monumental 15-book series, The Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan. And what that series did for me is it rekindled a love for a genre that I read as a youth. And it's kind of great because pretty much from the 1990s until 2020, besides rereading some of those series that I loved as a youth and A Song of Ice and Fire, I hadn't really read much. So I have all of these kind of gaps in my knowledge of the fantasy genre. And one of those gaps was Robin Hobb. So I was very excited to get started with Robin Hobb's Farseer Trilogy. So the three books of the Farseer Trilogy, which you see behind me, Assassin's Apprentice, Royal Assassin, and Assassin's Quest, were written in the 1990s. And they're actually the first of 5 series set in this world that's called the Realm of the Elderlings. So having loved this Farseer Trilogy, I'm looking forward to delving into those future series very soon. So the Farseer Trilogy follows a character named Fitz. And it's a first-person narrative, and over the 1,800 pages of these 3 books, you really get to know Fitz and his story. And I want to keep this spoiler-free, so I'll keep it kind of vague, but I would just say that a lot happens to Fitz. In fact, you see a lot of reviewers talk about an easy way to sum up the Farseer Trilogy is just to say, ah, poor Fitz. But Fitz's coming-of-age tale is at the heart of these 3 books. So at the beginning of the series, Fitz discovers that he is the bastard son of the oldest prince of the king. And he is brought to Buckheap, which is where the king resides, and he is taken into the royal family, even though he is the bastard son of the eldest prince. And he's trained in a lot of disciplines, one of which you can tell by the title of the 3 books, is he's trained as the king's personal assassin. And over the course of the 3 books, you see how that plays into his development as a character, but you also see a lot of other things in play that I want to talk about that I really enjoy. One of the great aspects of plot that I really enjoyed in these 3 books is the court intrigue and the family dynamics of the royal family. Probably since The Song of Ice and Fire, I have not read anything on this level of that kind of intrigue. So there's a lot of political machinations, and Fitz gets caught up in the middle of all of this, as it seems that he is a character that just finds himself in the middle of a lot of things. And again, I'm keeping it spoiler-free, so I won't even give one of the names that they call him later in the series that tells a lot about what his story is all about. But let's talk about Fitz as a character. Character is my #1 favorite element of a story. That's why you can see a lot of Stephen King on this shelf behind me. I love when an author is so good at producing character. In fact, my recent foray back into the fantasy genre, that's what's drawn me to some authors before others, the ones that are notable for great character. I've already mentioned Robert Jordan. 2 others that I've read in the last 8 months that I've really enjoyed that produce great characters are Brandon Sanderson and Joe Abercrombie. And all 3 of those authors do a very different job at creating character. But I think in the Farseer Trilogy, Robin Hobb does it in the most unique way. These 3 books, it's an 1,800-page first-person narrative of Fitz looking back upon these momentous years of his life. So we get all of the characters from Fitz's point of view. Hobb has to create all of these secondary characters through Fitz's eyes rather than relying upon point of view chapters, which most other authors would do. And it really speaks to her mastery as an author that she is able to fully flesh out all of these characters. They are so vivid in my mind. You understand their character, their motivations so well, despite only seeing them through the lens of Fitz's character. So that's one thing that I was totally drawn to. Additionally, just seeing the coming of age tale of Fitz, from the 5 or 6 year old boy in the beginning of the tale to into his early 20s by the end, and then even beyond, years beyond that, when he is writing this tale, is such an enjoyment to watch this character through this progression. Because, like any great authors, he's not perfect. Fitz is no Mary Sue. He makes so many mistakes along the way. He alienates so many people in his life and doesn't always make the right decision. And he goes through so much, but he keeps pushing forward, and you will love Fitz. I have no doubt if you read these books, or have read these books, that you love Fitz. So I was drawn to character. Let's talk about setting a little bit. I really enjoyed the setting, and I love the world building that kind of took its time. In fact, most of the world building didn't happen until the second, and then even more so in the third book. And I enjoyed that because you kind of got time to focus on character, to establish your bearings in the world before you learned more of what was out there. In fact, the third book probably had the most world building of all of it. Another aspect of setting and world building is the magic system. I know modern fantasy readers just love their magic systems. I like how Robin Hobb handled the two magic systems. There are two magic systems in this world. One's called the wit and one's called the skill. And I love particularly how the skill kind of evolved. It started kind of as a soft magic system. That is one of those magic systems where you don't know how it works. And then as we got further into the series, as Fitz himself learned more about the skill, you learn more about it and became kind of a softer magic system. And I think that is really the way to go. Although I personally prefer a softer magic system versus a hard magic system. Because I think sometimes a hard magic system, I feel it takes you out of the story because you're worrying more about power levels and rules and all of these things. And I feel like sometimes I'm not reading literature but watching a video game. But I feel that Hobb handled this perfectly. We get a lot of the elements of a modern fantasy tale in that hard magic system just as it evolves through Fitz's eyes. But I will say the one thing that I probably love above else with Robin Hobb is her prose, her writing style. So let's talk about Hobb's writing style. And let me contrast her with 3 fantasy authors that I love. Robert Jordan's prose is fantastic. However, it can be a little flowery and a little repetitive. Although I did kind of long for that repetitive and flowery nature when Sanderson took over the Wheel of Time for the last 3 books. Sanderson's writing style is very different. He aims to create a very crystal clear picture. And he does an artful job at being able to write crystal clear prose that a very young reader could appreciate, but as an adult you don't feel it's dumbed down. So he's very good at that style of prose, but you would never give him an award for his writing style, I don't think. Joe Abercrombie. Say what you will about Logan Ninefingers. Say what you will about Joe Abercrombie, but his style is very stylistic. And I enjoy it, and he's a lot of fun to read. But when you read Robin Hobb's writing style, her prose is like a meal made by a gourmet chef. Now listen, I'm not one of those prose snobs. In fact, of the elements I've talked about in a story, number 1 for me is always going to be character, 2 is plot, 3 is setting, 4 is prose, but when I experience a master, I recognize it. And I felt so often in reading this book that these 3 books, I was witnessing a masterclass in the English language. So I adore Hobb's writing style. It's a bit more dense than others. To contrast with Sanderson, Oathbringer up here, about 1,200 pages, took me 6 days. Assassin's Quest, 800 pages, took me 9 days. it is a bit denser. So it does take a little bit longer for you to read through Robin Hobb than Brandon Sanderson, but it's so worth it because for me, I'm always immersed in a story more when the English is just so good that you can just taste the succulence of the language. So I just talked about all the great things. Let's talk about a few criticisms. Starting with the prose, it is a little dense. If you're someone who likes crystal clear prose a la Brandon Sanderson, and you like to get through books quickly, Hobb might not be the author for you because it's better enjoyed, more digestible in, a longer period of time. So although for me, I adore her writing style, I can understand if some people think it's a little too dense for them. I would say the other criticism is what I hear about the third book. The third book is much slower paced. You get a lot of world building, you get character development, and it doesn't have one of those, again, to contrast with Sanderson, it doesn't have a Sanderlanche of action at the end because some of the action takes place away from Fitz and we have a first-person narrative. But I enjoyed the ending. I really liked how she wrapped up pretty much every thread in the storyline. Although Fitz didn't experience all of these firsthand, you know exactly what happened and you were told about it. So if you're one who likes a big battle and a big action sequence to close a fantasy series, you might be a little disappointed with the end of the Farseer Trilogy. But I was not. It had perhaps a greater sense of realism than many other things that I have read. So in summary, I loved the Farseer Trilogy by Robin Hobb. I think I've found an author that may be someone who I regard as one of my all-time greats very, very soon. 3 books isn't enough for me to make that unequivocal declaration. However, I do have a feeling that that's where Hobb's trajectory is going, especially because I've heard many people say that of Hobb's 5 series in the Realm of the Elderlings, the Farseer Trilogy is the weakest of the 3. And if it's the weakest for the 3, I cannot wait to pick up the rest. So I will be reading the Live Ship Traders trilogy very soon, most likely in October. I'm going to be circling back to read the 4th, 5th, and 6th novels of Frank Herbert's Dune series first, and then I'll be back to Robin Hobb probably in October. So if you want to hear me talk more about Robin Hobb or Frank Herbert, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. Leave me a comment if you've read Robin Hobb or the Farseer Trilogy or even more. Please let me know what you think of this video, what you think of my thoughts, whether you love Robin Hobb like I do, whether she's your cup of tea or not. But as always, thank you for watching. Until next time, goodbye.